This is the home of Stephen Spender. Stephen Spender's home, until 1995, spanned the difference between the poplar and my home, and the poplar was halfway between both our homes. I've not put that very well, but it's just been a very difficult afternoon, so bear with me. This is my poem that I wrote in 1995 when Stephen died. I think it was June 1995, and the poet Barry Tebb started to write after a block of more than 20 years. He wanted to write an obituary poem for Stephen. This is what I wrote at the same time. I never knew you, only the poplar towering into night air the last 10 years. From Abbey Road it seemed to be far nearer to you than to me, and once when I passed by, it did not occur simply to look up at the poplar, though always wondering that the street light I could see so bleakly in Ladoon Road through the day's end, and sometimes just sufficiently near, was also a beacon as I turned by your corner carrying shopping and fear. I'll never know what distance from your eye, casual as the news that you had died, with you the poplar on the other side. Yet I live and feel nearer than before. Somehow I am able to speak to you now, without time's usage between us, or my own dereliction every day, through which must pass intermittently those who were truly great. They pass alongside those who lived inflicting hurt. The hurt, a few disparate voices left behind that chose never to forget, and time as witness. The barriers are down. I walk the space towards you in St. John's Wood. Years oppress my heart. Presentiment I cannot face, the far side of a poplar, and a friend waiting quietly, rehearsing the end. I am accustomed at last to my own silence and the endlessness around me, as a world-weary traveller alone, surrendering to anonymity, awaiting the wind's direction, and yet no longer at the helm, knowing only the limits of a poplar leaf to set a course by, or that full momentary cerebral calm over an engulfed shore, enough to uphold and after survive the spirit shipwrecked, words lost at their core, and unattended breathe again alive. In a lined tradition, a decade once, midway a poplar was the difference. As you can see, this house, with its rather overgrown garden, still seems to me to carry the spirit of Stephen Spender and his wife. They both for many years lived here. The house next door underwent a renovation which lasted for 2 years. The house stretches towards the end of Loudon Road onto Marlborough Place. And for 2 years, her last 2 years, she had to live with the noise of renovation. She wondered if it would ever cease, as I do now, on this wonderful afternoon, outside Stephen Spender's home. I'm going back down Blenheim Road to to my own flat, and I cannot imagine anything more different to this quiet, leafy street. And yet it can happen here. I've seen people all over, people my age too, people with children, desperate about the noise next to them. And it's not just tenants, statutory tenants or people with leases who can be evicted for complaining. It's us all. We are all being threatened with this noise. And there seems nothing that can be done anywhere to make amends. The Section 61 that's been imposed on Manor Apartments is hardly worth the paper it is written on if it cannot be policed. It must be followed up with noise meters, otherwise it cannot be policed. And Bruce Ritchie and his crew can be allowed to put 2 fingers up to Westminster Council. There are many that have wanted noise meters and never managed to get them. I do hope that the constant infringement, especially last Friday and Tuesday, will make the difference, as Mrs. Byrne was able to make the difference 7 years ago. Talking about Mrs. Byrne, my last memory of Mrs. Byrne was of her having to be carried up 4 flights of stairs by her son and his friend because the lifts had broken down. Both of them had broken down. Those lifts were only repaired because a tenant here had heart problems and it was done under enforcement. Today, in Manor Apartments, the goods lift is not working. We have no hot water in the block, possibly for the weekend, if it's not repaired this afternoon. And there's no sign of that happening anytime soon. No water to the bathroom, no water to the kitchen, and fear and dread this afternoon until 4 o'clock, when I can leave this hellhole and record Barry in Sutton reading his poetry. This is a beautiful road. The flowers, in spite of the rain, have managed to get out and put on a show for us all this afternoon, allowing me for a little while to forget the horror that I'm going back to. What can be done? Postman Pat might have been reined in, but not for long. What was lost the other day, Tuesday, was the fact that he thought he could come into my flat, that my flat belonged to residential land. And by the end of that afternoon, I truly thought it did. Only Mr. Sale, the Environmental Health Officer for Westminster, could make the distinction that my flat belonged to Granger and that I was a tenant of theirs. Whatever appointments I had that day, and I was actually on my way to Barry and Daisy that day, had to be curtailed, set aside, so that Bruce Ritchie's crew, Stoneforce, his own form of enforcement, could come into my flat, clear up the evidence of their rubble, and be out again, and let more fall into the risers of my flat. There are 3 risers there. 1 has been dealt with. The other 2 are still not sealed. Pat seemed not to know where the risers were in the same quadrant. He couldn't, unless he had a full inspection of my flat, work out for himself, as an operations manager, what a riser was at my door or where it could possibly be. There was no point in asking him, could I point it out to him in flat 12? That would not have been allowed. Today, as you've seen, we've crossed the distance between Stephen Spender's home and mine, and no 2 lives could possibly be more different. I have tried to live here for 7 years with no hope and every year increasing dread. And yet, I am a tenant here, with all the rights that that is supposed to confer on me. And I've been here for 28 years. Many incidents of actual harassment have taken place, and there's been absolutely nothing I could do. In some cases, Bruce Ritchie would stop any further action by the police, however serious that harassment was. His crew, his Polish workers, used to arrive here, all 9 of them, at 7 o'clock in the morning. At that time, I had 2 cats who were ill with parvovirus. I was nursing many of them myself. And the little sleep I'd managed to get was interrupted by this crew. When I went out to remonstrate with them and to record their activities, I was flung against the back of the lorry, the trailer lorry. The police who came out fully believed me and were behind me and were incredibly supportive. But when it got a little bit higher, and we took it higher, Superintendent Morgan took Bruce Ritchie's side, as there was no witness and no evidence to what had happened. The previous operations manager, Keith Barron, something like 2 or 3 years ago, they tried to establish a car wash in the back of Manor Apartments, then Old Manor Court. This was curtained off as some kind of mini hearse, but sure enough, the high-pressured hoses would come out to wash Bruce Ritchie's fleet outside my flat. When I went out and turned the hose off, Keith Barron arm wrestled my hand from the tap at the back. And not on that occasion, the police refused to come out. On another occasion in 2010, a night when I had to attend an NHS meeting at the Royal Free, one of Bruce Ritchie's vans decided he would practice parking in the garage just outside my flat. He did this 7 times, making as much noise as he possibly could. I wasn't allowed to even look at him through my window, without him asking and questioning what did I think I was doing. Finally, I went out to confront him. He stood very close, as Postman Pat did the other day, and put 2 fingers up to my face and jabbed my face repeatedly. He didn't actually touch my face, but he was very close. When we wrote to the police, the borough commander instructed Bruce Ritchie to apologise to me, and this man, for the first time in his life, had to apologise to someone as low down as me, a poet and a protester. The rest of the bullying and the harassment has taken place as slab drilling and renovation, water deprivation in the bathroom, freezing cold water which was only put right after months. Several times a week this would happen, and only when Adrem came out, who were employed by my own landlord's Granger, did my water supply magically get restored. I've had all this, and I'm 64, and I'm tired now. I want to write. I want to look back on my life as Stephen Spender could in his flat, without fear of oppression or aggression or harassment that gets turned round so that the victim is demonised, as happened on Tuesday. The last bastion of resistance, my door, would have to fall open before Bruce Ritchie's crew. The slogan on Stoneforce's van says, "Inspire, deliver, create." Those words make me shudder when I see them on that van. and nothing could be more different, as symbols of oppression in St. John's Wood, as the difference between symbols of oppression. A stone forces than in my backyard, and Stephen's and the lintels of Stephen Spender's home, which must have been heaven on earth.